Hey, I'm Pascal from Orangepixel and welcome to another video. Last week I dug up HTML5 versions of some of my classic games. But while doing that, stumbling on this hard drive, I also found even older games. And it made for a great video last week. If you haven't watched that one, check it. However, I wanted to search for the HTML5 game. I'm going to call it web games from now because it's a lot easier to pronounce. I was looking for web versions of my games because they were originally created for Chrome OS and Firefox OS, because at some point Firefox released a OS, an operating system for phones, and they had specific phones that would run Firefox OS as a counter thing for iOS and Android. It failed pretty quickly. All that's left now is a couple of t-shirts. I don't wear these very often, but hey, I got a couple of t-shirts and a couple of devices that pretty much don't do anything anymore because Firefox OS ended. Moving on, I created those versions for those things back in the day, and that's 2015 I think, and web games weren't really that happening. I think Flash was still around maybe, although it was dying and killed off by various companies. But I was wondering if I could still run those versions, those games on the current browser, and if I could do something with them. So let's look into that after the intro. So this is how Gunslugs 2 has to look. It's full screen, it runs on your PC, it runs extremely fast. Originally I developed this game in my old framework before I used libgdx, a library that allows me to release games on both PC and mobile. But before that I only released on mobile. I was looking for ways how to release these games on PC. Since then I've ported this game to libgdx and it's available on Steam like the other Gunslugs versions. Also, it's released on like many other platforms available since. But I once wanted to see if I could maybe have HTML versions or web versions run standalone on a PC. Chrome OS would actually allow me to do that, so I had a Chrome OS version of this game. But back in those days, it wasn't really viable to create a standalone web version that would just run like that. Now the quality of web version was still pretty cool, because if I turn this into Windows version, you'll see this is actually the browser version. This is running in Chrome OS, this is HTML, the full game, sound effects, everything, it scales, it resizes, pixel art, low resolution, it's fully running. So for the last week I've been tinkering with this project in between the normal work on Regulator City. Just tiny changes because this framework was now almost 10 years old, written in 2015. It needed a little updating because browsers have gotten much better actually. And so a lot of technical little things needed to change. Multi-touch, because yes, it also runs on the phone browser. There's also a huge improvement in how I could render it, because the original version I had all the art assets resized 4 times, so that every image was already 4 times bigger than it should be. That was the only way, because I couldn't scale the canvas without making it very blurry. They have since added a filter, image rendering filter, that will actually keep the pixels. I can just render it in like a very tiny canvas and then scale that canvas to the right size of the browser. So that actually renders things even faster, because I'm now rendering pixels, just 1 pixel per pixel instead of 4x4 pixels for 1 pixel. So it's actually improved a lot in various areas. You can also rotate. You can actually force it to go horizontal, landscape or portrait mode. Gamepad support. I had it in the game, but right now the buttons don't do the right thing. But they actually made a whole new gamepad API, so I'm gonna rewrite all my code for that, so that I have a cool framework on which I can build games for the web. And okay, the logical question now is, why would I even attempt web games? What's the idea behind that? What's the point? Pretty much it's not going to be Steam. It's not going to be PC games. I mean, PC gamers and Steam gamers especially are very demanding of what they want in a game, and if they don't get that, they're very vocal about it. They don't move on to the next game that might just be their interest, but they rather just dish on a game that they don't like. They are very demanding on what's in there. If you have a great game but it is missing preferences and settings and resolution changes and all those things, they can get really annoyed with it, or they see it as a mobile game port that isn't really fully PC ready, even though the game runs perfectly on their device or on their PC. So they're just a bit picky and demanding. Web games are also more casual, and that's a lot of benefits. That means I can create them a lot faster. It's not about everything around it, because this is more like a piece of candy. It's not a full dinner like a PC game is. More like a candy bar that you eat in between. You're hungry, you're craving for something, you eat it, it's gone, it's forgotten about. You just want these games to quickly start. They don't need story or intros or whatever. You just want to quickly dive into it, have a little fun with it, and then move on to the next thing, which is probably not even a game, but your normal life. It's the game you play in between things. When you're watching a boring movie, you grab your phone and you play a little bit. Now, of course, you can play mobile games as well, but these games don't need to be installed. I heard from some parents that they prefer their kids to play web games because they don't need to install all this crap on their device or on their parents' device, and not knowing what it does in the background, takes up space, all those things. You can simply pick up a web game, play it for a minute, and there's no trace you ever played it, which is a cool thing and which makes it for a very different type of game. But it happens to be the type of game I originally created when I started Orangepixel. See last week's video. But they also come with a couple of things that I also like. You can easily update them, you can easily upload them anywhere, and they are playable, easy to distribute in that sense. Although I'll get to that in a minute, because you don't want to just release it everywhere. For me, it also feels like a perfect boring weekend or evening project. I can tinker on these games on my Chromebook that doesn't have all the tools installed, because I can use an online editor, change these files, tinker with it until it's actually playable and fun, and I can actually test it on the Chromebook. And this is not an ad for Chromebooks at all, but it's actually a pretty cool thing to be able to do that. I can easily tinker on these games and it still feels like tinkering. So the idea is that I could potentially make games, casual games like this, in a month, maybe less even, using a lot of assets from all my bigger games, and then coming up with very tiny, simple game ideas. And I already have a couple of games that I played last week's video from back in the early days of Orangepixel. I want to recreate those. They are very simple. They are very clear to me what I have to add and do. So it should be very easy to create these. And then we're going to be able to release them and see if they actually make money, which is still the thing that I'm aiming for, because this is a full-time job for me. I need to make money somehow. And now, on the point of making money, I heard a lot of good things from various game developers. And if I can create these games within a very short development cycle and have a couple of them out there doing a little bit of revenue, it's gonna be interesting. So right now my focus for distributing these games is Poki. And why Poki? Again, I'm not sponsored in any way. I'm just talking about the stuff I've been researching. Poki seems to be one of the bigger players, or the biggest player out there. It doesn't hurt that they are Dutch, just like me. So they are actually nearby if I ever need them, which I don't think I do. So it just seems like a good place to start. And I actually got in on their new testing service, whatever, onboarding, which sounds a little bit like the old Steam Greenlight. If it does well, it gets actually on Poki. If it doesn't, it doesn't get on there. We'll see how that goes. I'm not a fan of that, because that's actually some sort of gatekeeping towards distribution. But there are other players out there. So if this doesn't work out, I'm going to look into the other players and see how we can distribute these web games. Right now, I just had to dig up the old versions of Gunslugs and Gunslugs 2. And I know I had a lot more. I had Groundskeeper, I had Heroes of Loot, all running in the browser. Neoteria, a shooter, a horizontal shoot 'em up. I had web versions of these games, but they're not on this drive. So I have to figure out if I can still find them somewhere. Now, back in 2015, I was working on a MacBook. So I'm going to dig up the MacBook, and hopefully there is still a directory there somewhere that has the source code for the other games. Because I'm very excited to get as much games on there as quickly as possible, just to see if all of this works out. Are there downsides? Of course there are downsides. First of all, this is also going to be a very crowded market. It's not like nobody's making web games. Look at the front page of Poki, scroll down endlessly. There's so many games already out there. It's gonna be tough to make your games pop out or stand out, but it's not impossible. Talk to various developers that actually have a good income from web games. So I know it's possible. It's just not gonna be the easiest thing ever. but that's never the case, is it? The money you get is revenue share of ad income. That's just two things that, I mean, yeah, I'm not really happy with that. Revenue from ad income, that's like freemium on mobile, and that's just very hard to pinpoint because sometimes there's a lot of ad revenue incoming, sometimes there's very little. But hey, it's the only thing out there, so we're gonna go with it. Now the final downside, which is I think the biggest one for me, I have to sit down and actually develop casual games, and these games will not be available on PC, on Steam, or on consoles because they will not be fit for that market. So I really have to design games that are specifically designed for these web distribution areas. That's right now I'm going with Gunslugs 1 and 2, which aren't really designed for that either. But it's a good way for me to get into it, to make sure my framework is up to date and running and does everything it needs to do. And then we'll see, we'll have to design games specifically for this market. Downside, because I still want to create the bigger games. Because I have no plans of ending releases on Steam, I still want to create the bigger games for Steam, for mobile, for Switch and every other console like Atari VCS, whatever comes around. I enjoy creating those bigger games, but they are very risky to create, and having a little extra revenue stream coming from simpler games would be very much appreciated right now. If you do game development as a hobby, which a lot of you are doing, or a side gig next to your normal job, you probably didn't notice it, but the game industry is really going through very hard times. Publishers are having a hard time getting their money back on investments on games. Game developers are having a hard time finding funding or publishers, and doing it all themselves, it's very hard to get back the money you put into a game. It's just a rough time everywhere for everybody. There's so many people that lost their job, and a lot of them will still want to be making games, so they will start their own company, which just means more games in the mix. It's rough out there. Honestly, if this is your job and you're not worried right now, you're not paying attention. So I have been worried all years, basically. I have been looking for ways out and solutions. Gauntlet of Power, released earlier this year, did pretty well. It pretty much made back the investment, but it didn't make a profit yet. It's gonna make a profit over the coming years as I push updates and do discounts and sales. We're still releasing it on Switch. I have it running on my phone already. Actually had that for a few months now. Don't tell anybody. It's running on my phone, so I'm going to do a mobile release. I just have to figure out if I'm going to do premium, pay once and you get the full game, or maybe with in-ad payments, or maybe a demo version that you can upgrade to the full. I have to figure those things out right now because the mobile market has changed a lot since my last release on there. So I'm not sure what the best solution is going to be on that front. Besides that, I have Regulated City coming later this year. Of course, that had an investment company funding it and backing it, so a lot of the money that that game is going to make is going to go back to the investors. A little bit to me, but a lot to the investors. So long term, I have to make plans for the next year because things aren't looking extremely well, honestly. The market is so harsh. You have to make games very quickly, and you have to still find time to market them. Finding money to fund them is very hard. I've seen a lot of developers already in recent months pretty much quit, or they create games now on the side and they do work for other companies and other things as their main gig to get money, and then they take more time to release their games. That's one option and solution. It's really rough, and I'm not exaggerating, and anybody telling you differently is pretty much lying on YouTube. Honestly, it's very rough to create and release games right now and make money on them. So for me, this is my 2025 plan. The first thing that I have to do is release Regulated City, or finish Regulated City, so that it's done in November. That's my personal deadline. I've said it has to be done, has to be finished, wrapped up, completed, done. Gauntlet of Power is still going to get a couple of updates. I want to keep pushing that game because I think it should have a bigger audience than it has right now, and I think it's a very cool game still. But after that, after November, a lot of my focus will be on creating casual web games quickly. Just a couple to see if I can make it work and if it brings in an extra revenue stream. Besides that, I still have Space Grunts 3 that's already partly made. Talked about that many weeks or many months ago. That's still one of my projects for PC and console, Switch, Atari VCS, stuff like that. But I need a plan for extra money coming in. And hopefully web games will be it. I guess we're gonna find out. I'll talk about it a little more on this channel as I release stuff. Gunslugs 2 is almost ready. Been tinkering a lot with it. It still has a couple of things that I don't like, but I'm almost ready to submit it to Poki and then go through that whole process and see how it goes releasing on there. And based on the results of that game, we're gonna see how much time we put into creating more web games. Hopefully it's gonna do pretty well. So that's really the reason I dug up these old projects last week. I have to figure out if I can do something with them again. We're gonna find out. But that's it for this week's video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below. Let me know about web games, what you think about them and all that stuff. And I know web games, it's a saturated market. There are many more distribution options and Facebook, Insta games and whatever. I've been researching everything. That's pretty much my job. Look into everything and make sure I do a good decision. But whatever else you want to add, drop it in the comment below or come say hi on the Discord. And I'll see you next week. Bye.